All right, since we are not plants, we have to ingest all of our energy from our food. We can't photosynthesize, we can't produce ATP, we can't produce glucose on our own, so we're going to have to get our food from our environment. So the first thing we're going to have to do is break down our food. So our digestive system is going to break down complex polymers down into monomers. The simple, smaller molecules can then get absorbed into the bloodstream and carried to our cells, where they can be used to make ATP. So we're going to take our carbohydrates, our complex carbohydrates, we're going to break them down into monosaccharides or simple sugars, which can then be transported in the bloodstream. Now, there are two ways that we can actually get ATP from glucose. Once we have broken starch into glucose, we have two options. One is cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is going to be an aerobic process. Aerobic means that it requires a great deal of oxygen. This is why we call it cellular respiration. Oxygen goes in, carbon dioxide comes out. In fact, this is why you breathe oxygen. You don't breathe oxygen for fun. You breathe oxygen because your cells need it to convert glucose into ATP. Without oxygen, your cells would not be able to perform that function. Without ATP, your whole body is going to shut down very, very rapidly. This is why it's so important to breathe. So cellular respiration, we're going to breathe in oxygen into our lungs. That oxygen is going to transport to our cells. Inside of our cells, we can then use that oxygen to break glucose down into ATP, and this process is going to give off carbon dioxide as a result. That carbon dioxide is then going to pass out of our cells into our bloodstream to our lungs and then out of the body. So this process, cellular respiration, requires oxygen, aerobic. Fermentation, on the other hand, is a process by which we can obtain ATP from glucose that does not require oxygen. This is what's known as anaerobic. Anytime you see that prefix an, it usually means a negation or a not. So you can kind of think of it as we have aerobic and not aerobic in terms of requiring oxygen. So here is the process of cellular respiration. We start off with one molecule of glucose, C6H12O6. We add oxygen, and what we get as a result is carbon dioxide plus water plus energy. Interestingly enough, do you know what plants do? Plants undergo a process known as photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is the dead opposite. Photosynthesis, we take carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, water from the ground, energy from the sun, and we make glucose and oxygen. This is why plants suck up carbon dioxide and give off oxygen. They intake carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. They give off oxygen because they are undergoing this reverse process of turning carbon dioxide, water, and energy into glucose. Very neat process that plants do. One other thing that I would like to point out is that plants have not only mitochondria, plants also, or not only chloroplasts, plants also have mitochondria. Plants are not making glucose for you. Like, you can get glucose from plants, but they are not making it for you. They are making it for themselves. Plants are making glucose and starch for their own purposes. They're going to use this for their own purposes. So their mitochondria, plants have chloroplasts where they can take up carbon dioxide, take up water, take up energy, and produce glucose and oxygen. Plants can also do the reverse. Plants have mitochondria. Plants can take glucose and oxygen and give off carbon dioxide, water, and energy. So I just want to point that out there. Plants have both. They can undergo cellular respiration and photosynthesis. Humans cannot do photosynthesis. There are 4 phases of cellular respiration that we want to talk about. The first phase is glycolysis, followed by the transition reaction, the citric acid cycle, the electron transport chain. These phases are going to be occurring continuously in the cell. Don't worry if you didn't get a chance to write down those 4 phases. We're going to cover each one of them in depth. Phase 1 is glycolysis. Glycolysis is named because we are lysosing glucose, or we're lysosing that glycol, so we're lysosing that sugar. Glycolysis, we're going to take that glucose molecule, that 6-carbon glucose molecule, and we're going to break it in half into 2 3-carbon pyruvate molecules. This process is going to occur in the cytoplasm and does not require energy, or not energy, does not require oxygen for this process. So we're going to split one glucose into 2 pyruvate molecules. We're going to generate what is known as a net gain of 2 ATP and 2 NADH molecules. The reason that we say that there is a net gain of 2 ATP is because this process actually requires the input of energy. Remember we talked about how a lot of reactions don't occur on their own. They're going to require the aid of enzymes to drive reactions forward. Some reactions, like the case of glycolysis, don't just require enzymes, they actually require ATP as well. They're going to require a little bit of energy to jumpstart this reaction. So what we're going to have to do is invest 2 ATPs worth of energy to get this reaction started, and we're going to produce 4 ATP out of the end. So 2 go in, 4 come out for a net gain of 2 ATP. We're also going to produce 2 NADH molecules during this phase. We're going to talk about NADH molecules a little bit later on, but just know that NADH is going to help us gain more ATP further down the road. So this step generates a net gain of 2 ATP. As I said before, this step does not require oxygen. This is an anaerobic step in cellular respiration. Overall, cellular respiration is going to require quite a bit of oxygen, but this initial step does not. Phase 2, the transition reaction. You may also have heard of this called the prep reaction. So in case you've heard that terminology, I'm including that as well. The prep reaction. The prep reaction is actually going to occur in the matrix of the mitochondria. Take a moment, review. Where is the matrix? What is the matrix of the mitochondria? That is where this prep reaction is going to occur. In this stage, we're going to be removing carbon in the form of carbon dioxide from each pyruvate. So we're going to be turning this 3-carbon molecule into a 2-carbon molecule called acetyl-CoA. In this step, we're going to be giving off carbon dioxide. One pyruvate molecule going in is going to produce 1 acetyl-CoA molecule and 1 NADH molecule. No ATP is formed in this stage, which is why it's called a prep reaction or a transition reaction, is because we're not actually producing ATP. So but keep in mind, when we have our glycolysis, we take our glucose and we turn it into 2 pyruvate molecules. So this is just what 1 pyruvate molecule does. Keep in mind that there are 2 pyruvate molecules that go into this transition reaction coming out of glycolysis. Next, we move into phase 3, the citric acid cycle or the Krebs cycle, named after the gentleman who discovered it. The Krebs cycle also occurs in the matrix of the mitochondria. Review again, where is or what is the matrix of the mitochondria? In this step, acetyl-CoA is going to enter the citric acid cycle, and we're going to produce 2 ATP, 2 FADH2, and 6 NADH molecules. We're also going to be releasing carbon dioxide as a waste product. So what I really want you to know, focus on for the Krebs cycle, we're going to get 2 ATP out, a whole bunch of cofactors, FADH2 and NADH, and carbon dioxide is going to be released in this stage. And here's a little bit of what that looks like. Acetyl-CoA goes into the cycle. It's going to form a molecule known as citrate. Citrate is going to break down. We're going to remove carbon dioxide. We're going to produce NADH. That alpha ketoglutarate is going to then break down again. It's going to remove carbon dioxide, is going to leave the cycle. We're going to produce another NADH and ATP at this stage. Succinate is what is left over. That's going to be broken down to produce FADH. Malate is then going to be produced. We're going to break that down to release another NADH, and we're left with oxaloacetate. Oxaloacetate can be broken down and used to produce more acetyl-CoA that's going to go through this cycle. There's a lot happening in the citric acid cycle. What I want you to get out of it is that acetyl-CoA goes in, carbon dioxide, and FADH, NADH, ATP come out. So just know what goes in, what comes out. You don't need to know all of the different byproducts. Finally, we're going to move into the electron transport chain. The electron transport chain, this is where the magic happens. This is where we get the bulk of our ATP. This is going to be found on the cristae of the mitochondria. This step is going to require a huge amount of oxygen. Electrons from FADH and NADH are going to be transferred from one protein to another until they reach oxygen at the end. As they're doing this, they're going to be releasing a butt ton of ATP molecules. If you remember, how many ATP did we get out of glycolysis? We got 2 net ATP. How much did we get out of the Krebs cycle? Nothing. How much did we get out of the Krebs cycle? 2 ATP. Here is the moneymaker. Here's where we get all of our ATP. So what's going to happen is that NADH that we've been producing is going to be passed. It's a very high energy state. It's going to be passed from one protein to another. And each time it passes through this protein, it's going to be through these proteins, it's going to be producing ATP. It does this by creating no, we're not going to get down any further in that. So all you need to know is that we're moving from a high energy state to a low energy state. And as we are moving down this electron transport chain, we're kicking off ATP, ATP, ATP at every step. So here you go. Here is a review of the cellular respiration. We have glycolysis located in the cytoplasm. And it's a step-by-step process which glucose is split into 2-pyruvate. This is what I want you to know about cellular respiration. You should be able to tell me where each phase is located and generally what goes in, what comes out, what is happening. I want you to know that this first step of glycolysis requires ATP. It requires an energy investment step. This final step, this is our big energy harvest right here at the end with that electron transport chain. Here is another model, a model of glucose coming in. This is a model of the entire process of glycolysis, glucose coming in, and then what's happening at each stage. You should be able to cover up the words on this diagram and walk yourself through this entire process of what is happening in cellular respiration. All right, our next step that we're going to talk about is fermentation. Fermentation can occur. This is going to be the breakdown of glucose without the aid of oxygen. So in the event that we do not have enough oxygen, you should still be able to produce some amount of ATP. This is going to happen in the cytoplasm, and it nets a grand total of 2 ATP. Fermentation is not an efficient process. It's very inefficient when compared to cellular respiration. It only results in 2 ATP. In addition, lactic acid fermentation takes place in the human body in muscles during strenuous exercise when the oxygen supply runs low. And this is not so great. Fermentation tends to have very toxic byproducts. Yes, we can get 2 ATP, but we also get lactic acid buildup. Muscle pain is caused by the accumulation of lactic acid, which sort of breaks down and can affect your muscles. Soreness is going to disappear once that lactic acid is then converted back to pyruvate in the liver. So it takes a while for that muscle soreness to wear off. Here is a great discussion question for you. Why do we undergo fermentation? Why does fermentation even exist as a possibility if it is so inefficient and it creates toxic byproducts? Other animals or other organisms will undergo fermentation, but they don't break down lactic acid down. Instead, they're going to produce a byproduct known as alcohol and carbon dioxide. Yeast and other organisms can undergo fermentation. They can produce ATP anaerobically, but they're going to produce alcohol, which is incredibly toxic to their own cells, as well as producing carbon dioxide. So it can be a very dangerous process. Why do we undergo it? Why do we even have that as an option? I'll give you a hint. There is an answer. All right. So finally, that is the end of our chapter. We covered a lot. We covered a lot in this chapter. So I would like you to take some time to review. Make sure that you are able to go through all of these steps before you move on to the next chapter. So you should be able to explain how the structure of the plasma membrane regulates movements of materials into and out of the cell. You should be able to describe the functioning structural features of each of the following organelles: the nucleus, endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi complex, lysosomes, and mitochondria. You should also be able to compare the structure and function I'm going to say skip that one. We're going to be less concerned with the structure and function of the cytoskeleton until a little bit later on when we start talking about mitosis. Finally, you should be able to summarize the efficiency of cellular respiration and fermentation as methods to